Well, good morning. It is time for Ask the Pastor again. And today we're going to tackle a question on Wesleyan theology. More specifically, the question by Nancy Goodyear was asked to explain the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. And so, what the Wesleyan Quadrilateral is a tool, an idea, a theory that Dr. Albert Ottler, who was a professor at Perkins School of Theology on the campus of Southern Methodist University, put together in the 1960s that explained in John Wesley's sermons his sources or his ideas or where his ideas kind of came from. And so we have the four sides of the quadrilateral: scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. But the name itself is misleading, and then it's come under some scrutiny and some thoughts recently. So people have been trying to think of a different name other than quadrilateral. And the reason being, when you think of a quadrilateral, you think of like a square or a rectangle where either all sides are equal, some sides are not equal to other, and the whole point of this is that not all of the sides are equal. So when Otler was looking at John Wesley's sermons, he thought that those four ideas of tradition, reason, experience, and scripture were what he used. And so scripture was obviously his primary source. And so this is where the contention is. His ideas of scripture were not equal to tradition, reason, experience. They kind of, that is the primary source that we go to, and John Wesley went to when we talked about working through a sermon or putting his sermons together. So scripture is very easy to define. It's the Bible, and he went through the Bible and found the passages he wanted to preach about. So that was his primary source. And so the other ideas that he used were this idea, we'll go through them one at a time, the idea of tradition. And so once you have your scripture passage from your primary source, the Bible, you look back on what has been written in the past. In my office, I have a collection of commentaries, and I have Bible software that has writings and passages and commentaries and sermons and all kinds of books and stuff like that talk about particular scripture passages. I can look them up on my software and read about them. So tradition, stuff from the past. So you look at what was written about it in the past to use that to influence your ideas about what the scripture passage or the sermon may be about. Reason is your intellect. So as you read this passage, which is your primary source, and you go through and look at what was written in the past, the tradition part of this. And so you use reason, you use your mind to think about the connections and the ideas and the thought processes and kind of how those all fit together. So we use our mind to think about the passage, not just relying totally on the past experience and the past writings, but what does your mind tell you about this passage? Which then leads us into the idea of our experience. What is our own personal experience with this passage? What does our own personal experience tell us about the theology of this passage and where we should go with it? So the reality is we have the primary source, scripture, which is up here, and then you have these kind of three legs falling down: tradition, reason, experience, and you use those three tools to develop a sermon, to look at what that scripture passage might mean. So tradition, using what was written in the past, reason, using our own intellect, and experience, which is closely related to reason. What does our experience tell us about this passage? It's a great tool. I mean, if you want to work through and, if you get asked to do a sermon, it's something you can do. You can find the passage that you want from the scripture, your primary source, and then you can read about what people have written about in the past and what has your experience told you about this passage, and what does your mind tell you about this passage. So it's kind of a neat tool that is handy to have around in your mind as you're working on a sermon. Not required to use by any stretch of the imagination, but most pastors use it every single week when we use a passage or when we develop a sermon. We just don't call it, tradition, reason, experience. We just do the process in our own minds and go through it. Because I read commentaries every week about the scripture passages that we're going to discuss, or in the Bible studies, I read a couple commentaries on what we're doing. I use reason to, in my own mind, about where it leads me, and I use my own experience as well. So, the quadrilateral, even though it's not the greatest name in the world, it's a tool that was developed to explain John Wesley's sermons, how he had developed and what he used in his process, and it's something that still continues on to this day. Great question, Nancy. I hope that answers it. If you have any more questions, please feel free to send them my way. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.